Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for this day. We pray that you will bless our time together today and that we'll be able to learn some things about what's going on in our world as we seem to be approaching the return of the Lord. Let's bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, we're actually starting on time today. I know that's unusual. I know people that probably in the kitchen getting a cup of coffee, and they'll come in, John Haller's already started. He started on time today, and I sent my title slide to Brian on his way to church this morning. He said he almost drove off the road when he saw it pop into his phone. So I love my comedian friends. So today we're talking about hard questions, no easy answers, and you can kind of see actually got this from the Bloomberg Business Week cover. Questions and the path to the answers is a little bit convoluted at times. And boy, do we live in a world where that's true. So we talk about the convergence of events and how things are happening very, very quickly. They're accelerating, they're converging. There's a logistics thing. I talk a lot about that just because I know these prophecies will be fulfilled, but they are fulfilled in a real world that will exist at that time. So sometimes I think it's easy to just say, well, that's going to happen, but I sort of think about the process about how does that actually happen? How does this final Babylon come together? If it's not already in existence, that's some people say it's already here, but there's a logistics part to that. When we talk about wars, in a great company and mighty army of Ezekiel chapter 38, there has to be a great company and a mighty army. And what does that mean? Particularly, what does it mean in light of what's going on in the world today? And we see a lot of development of asymmetrical type warfare and drones and that type of thing. And I think that all plays into it. And again, we reference this passage all the time. And I heard, but I understood not, Daniel chapter 12. Then said I, O my Lord, when shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. I did some interviews, and I interviewed Nicole Jansajan, a journalist who lives in Jerusalem. You can find this on our YouTube channel. Her husband is Armenian, and so she knew a lot about the Armenian ethnic cleansing that's taking place as we speak, and nobody talks about it, so I thought it was an important issue because it plays into the geopolitics of the Middle East quite a bit, and understand that not all Armenians have big houses like the ones down the road here from the church. If you've seen those down there, there's an Armenian quarter, though, in the old city. She talked about that and some of the disputes that are going on there. And I told her the size of the homes down there. And she said, I think that's bigger. Those two homes are bigger than the Armenian quarter in the old city of Jerusalem when you put them together. So you can look at that. I may be I'm pretty sure I'm doing a panel, a discussion this week with Jonathan Feldstein. I don't know if I'll be able to put it up on our YouTube channel, but I'll get you a link and everything so you can see it with Jonathan Tobin, the editor-in-chief of JNS, Jewish News Syndicate. Hopefully that'll take place on Wednesday. Everything will come together. So just pray that goes well. I'm trying to think what else I did. I did Prophecy Roundtable, and we asked some questions. And one of the things we talked about at Prophecy Roundtable this week was some of the things that are going on that seem to indicate that there's some things coming together that might be the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. There's a lot of push for that. I'll discuss a little bit this way. But one of the things that came up was somebody in the comments on the roundtable said, you futurists, and I'm a futurist, I think that the Bible speaks of future events that are taking place. And there's also a view called preterism. Now, even futurists are preterists to a certain extent because we think certain prophecies have been fulfilled, the destruction of the temple. A preterist, though, would believe that all prophecies were fulfilled in 70 AD. And Jesus returned, and we're now in the millennial kingdom. And Satan is bound. And as one of my friends used to say, if Satan is bound, we need to find out who keeps letting him go. Or he's on a very long chain. He's chained and bound. And I forgot my retort to preterists. And look, they're brothers and sisters in the Lord. But they're always, all prophecy was fulfilled. And you futurists, you just speculate. And I'm like, in 69 AD, all preterists were futurists as well. And they don't ever want, and they were speculating too, so how that was going to work out. So it's one of these things. So we're going to talk today about Davos, AI, some of the things going on in the Middle East, and tech. So we're going to talk a little bit about culture and some geopolitics. For example, here's this article from the Times in the UK. Scottish parents face jail if they stop children changing gender. That's proposed legislation in Scotland. Scotland, great golf, bad politics. I mean, the majority is bad politics. It's really gone. This is kind of interesting. We talk about, in fact, I was just having a discussion with somebody about Bill Gates wants to dim the sun. That's one of the things he thinks, well, we need to cool the earth. And I'm like, so that, to me, there's a logistics problem with that. How is he going to do that? How many thousands and thousands of planes would it take to do that? But he could just blow up a few volcanoes. This is a little video of some of the eruption drone footage that's taking place in Iceland as this volcano erupts and it's moving into neighborhoods. And there's really no defense when your house is in the middle of a lava flow goes over your house. You're probably losing your house. So all these people have abandoned their homes and move elsewhere. And so we see this a lot with people. And people were coming, they're flying helicopters and that type of thing over, and now they're not doing it because they don't know when that thing might really explode and start erupting. But that's Iceland today. This is sort of our ode to Kamala. And so this is going to be a big issue in the election coming up here in the United States, abortion. The Democrats and a lot of Republicans think it's a losing issue for Republicans to do anything about it, to ban it, block it in any fashion, abortion. So that's going to happen. So we're also going to talk a little bit about AI and some of the things that went on at Davos. Now, I have to tell you that I have dozens of hours of video that I've downloaded from Davos. I've not had time to go through all of it. I have a number of videos that we're going to play. And this AI thing is big. It was one of the big issues at Davos. And I reported to you last week that the Global Risk Report was released the week before Davos started last Monday. And the Global Risk Report, they said that the biggest problem in the world, and we'll hear a little blurb from someone at Davos, is disinformation and misinformation. And I thought I almost made this the title. It's like, in a world of, being warned about disinformation, being careful about disinformation by the biggest purveyors of disinformation in the world. They're the ones who push disinformation down our throats all the time. And there was a lot of that on display. So we'll play some of that, and then we'll talk about the Middle East, which could go on for quite a while because there's a lot going on there. So here, this AI threat to Google's grip on search. So even big Google is concerned that some of these smaller startups are coming in and they may be able to have artificial intelligence-based search engines that people will use to find information on the internet, and Google's concerned that it's going to impact their business model. And right now, they're been making money hand over fist, and they don't really want any competition. So maybe it's good that Google's threatened. Maybe they need to get their act together and not be so biased about the way they put out things. Also in Davos this week, they talked about that AI could trigger a financial crisis. Part of that is because they're expecting that many jobs, I heard that 40 to 60% of some white collar jobs could go away. This was talked about at Davos openly this week. And that's the CEOs and tech people that are putting this stuff together. They're thinking this is going to have an impact on the economy. And again, this was Davos versus democracies. And again, we have this situation where the purveyors of disinformation are the ones warning us about disinformation, which seems to be kind of upside down. And there was a lot of misrepresentation of things at Davos this week. It says here, the barbarians weren't only across the Atlantic. One got an invitation, and we'll talk about some of the things that went on at Davos. And AI really made an appearance at Davos and really confused a lot of people, because I was communicating with people that were like, well, I didn't know that he could speak English, and we'll see about that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play an interview between a correspondent who now goes by the name of Ina. Before, his name was Ian. So there's speaking to Sam Altman. And this is Sam Altman talking a little bit about developments in artificial intelligence. He's the head of OpenAI. This was an Axios forum that took place on the sidelines of the Davos conference.
On stage, we're trying this out. We'll see how it works. So I am live streaming from my Meta Ray-Ban glasses. This is a first for us, so this should be fun. It's been a busy couple months for you, Sam.
It was a busy year.
You got fired, you got hired, you got
quit,
married.
I got back again. I did get married, yeah.
Congratulations on two of those three things.
Thank you.
What does 2024 Sam Altman know that 2023 Sam Altman didn't?
I mean, a lot of things. Look, when we decided to launch ChatGPT, we thought it was going to do well, but we had no idea how well it was going to do. And we thought the models we knew they were going to be great eventually, but we didn't think they were good enough to resonate like ChatGPT and GPT-4 have. And so I think one piece of knowledge is that this technology, even with all of its current limitations, is far more useful than we thought, and can integrate into our lives in a much more valuable way than we thought. And so now that we know that, as we think about launching the next much better models, we come with a different perspective.
Does that mean OpenAI is comfortable to go into, I don't want to pick on an individual country because my hope is that they all expand their human rights, but there's a lot of countries that don't, for example, respect LGBTQ rights. If country X said, in order to operate in our country, you have to change the way OpenAI's models answer questions about that. Is that something you're willing to do?
I mean, if like, again, in this idea of like a broad, what the absolute constraints are, if the country said, all gay people should be killed on sight, then no, we would say this is like, I hope anything that the world, the people of the world would come to as a principle would say that is well out of bounds. But there are probably other things that I don't personally agree with that a different culture might about gay people that, the model should still be able to say. And I think like it is not we have to be somewhat uncomfortable as a tool builder here with some of the uses of our tools and again, there are things where I think we can just say we draw a line here, absolutely.
But if I'm hearing right, you do foresee a world in which OpenAI's models might answer a question differently in different countries based on their values.
I would say more than that, it'll be for different users with different values, which, the country's issue I think is somewhat less important, but also
but a lot of countries aren't comfortable with the users choosing what they get to, and it's not just the US.
Is the question here like, will we respect other governments?
Will you it's come up before. I mean, Google decided not to do business in China because
and there are
much.
countries where we decide not to do business, but there are a lot of governments who I think have different beliefs than us, where we can still say there's enough common ground here.
So one thing that we can say is that artificial intelligence may make billionaires, but they don't spend any money on sound systems and microphones. And whatever he calls himself, themself now, Ina or whatever, your glasses you need an upgrade. Go get the new Google Vision Pro headset and try that out on your next live stream, or try it out in advance. So this is Klaus Schwab, of course, the CEO of the World Economic Forum, or the head founder of the World Economic Forum, and Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Union. And this is the beginning of her talk that she gave on the first day of Davos. And of course, Klaus got up there and said, listen, this year is about the theme of the forum is rebuilding trust. Now, why would he be concerned about the elites of the world having to rebuild trust? Did they diminish the trust that people might have in them any over the past few years? And the answer is, you betcha. They sure did. So they're rebuilding trust. And it's interesting, again, and so what you saw leading up to this, there were a number of newspapers that reported things like the New York Times said, well, conspiracy theorists and far-right people have really diminished the influence of the World Economic Forum, so you may not want to pay too much attention to it this year. So good principle in life is when the New York Times tells you to ignore something, pay really close attention. Do the opposite. My wife and I joke about that all the time. Well, you thought that's what I meant. No, you should go with the opposite of what your instinct tells you. And then you're likely to be correct. There was a whole Seinfeld show on that, which was one of the best episodes of that Seinfeld history. So here's Ursula von der Leyen opening her talk at the World Economic Forum after being introduced by Klaus Schwab.
Dear Klaus, your annual global risk report makes for a stunning and sobering read. For the global business community, the top concern for the next 2 years is not conflict or climate. It is disinformation and misinformation, followed closely by polarization within our societies. These risks are serious because they limit our ability to tackle the big global challenges we are facing. Changes in our climate, our geopolitical climate, shifts in our demography and in our technology, spiraling regional conflicts and intensified geopolitical competition and their impacts on supply chains. The sobering reality is that we are once again competing more intensely across countries than we have in several decades. And this makes the theme of this year's Davos meeting even more relevant: rebuilding trust. This is not a time for conflicts or polarization. This is a time to build trust. This is a time to drive global collaboration more than ever before. This requires immediate and structural responses to match the size of the global challenges. I believe it can be done. And I believe that Europe can and must take the lead in shaping that global response.
So so in the New York Times this morning, they had this big couple multi-page article about America is under attack inside the anti-DEI crusade. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so they go along and they identify the purveyors of the misinformation about DEI. And I can tell you that everything that Heather McDonald and these other people have said about DEI is absolutely true. And I know this because when I looked at the comments in the New York Times article, sometimes it's, you have to just consider it fun to read through the comments of a New York Times article, particularly when they're talking about conservative ideas. It gets a bit vicious, almost to the point of comedy. And of course, I knew that the New York Times was wrong on this because they got so much support in the comments from these crazy leftists that I knew that and part of what they're doing is they're putting out this propaganda. Don't believe the people are against DEI. And in the comments, people are saying, DEI works. But today, Blackstone or BlackRock and other companies are pulling away from another corporate version of DEI called ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance. They had made up funds where people could invest in ESG funds. And guess what's happening? People are taking their money out of there really quickly. So BlackRock has come out and said, well, we're really going to push that much. And so there is some good news wrapped up in all of this, but I don't think they're going to go away. So in this article, it says here that, so for example, there's this paragraph here. Recruiting a diverse staff of educators and giving students an opportunity to learn about a wide range of cultures and societies are important goals. And some universities, such as the State University of New York, have adopted policies that allow much more freedom to students and administrators to fulfill those goals as they see fit. But as a recent PEN America report put it, referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, there is a difference between protecting a school or faculty member's right to include DEI programming and mandating that they do so, especially in higher education. The report called the California mandate, where you have to do this. You have to include this in your curriculum. You have to have your professors in a lot of places. You don't get hired unless you sign a diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment, or you have something on your resume to show how committed you are to the goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which means you're woke, leftist, Marxist, communist stuff. What have you done to further those goals? The report called the California mandate one of the most censorious educational gag orders we have seen. They're trying to shut people up that might disagree with this. The other thing that I saw this week were some articles about that the growth in administrators at state at colleges and universities, at some colleges and universities, for example, in California and the public college and university system there, administrators have gone up, have increased by 60 to 80% over the past decade. Faculty appointments have gone up about 4%. What are all those people doing? They're the DEI cops to keep everybody in line and to make sure that they're shoving it down the students' throats. This has a practical application. Here is a tweet from Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a psychologist, a licensed psychologist in Ontario, and they have said, listen, Jordan, you're going to have your license pulled because we don't like what you're posting. You're not woke. You're not committed to DEI. So you need to go to special training to essentially a re-education camp. So here's this tweet. A higher court in Canada has ruled that the Ontario College of Psychologists indeed has the right to sentence me to re-education camp. There are no other legal avenues open to me now. It's capitulate to the petty bureaucrats and the addled, pated woke mob, or lose my professional license. Congratulations, CP Ontario. You won this round. Mark my words, however. The war has barely started. There is nothing you can take from me that I am unwilling to lose. So watch out. Seriously, you've been warned. National Post in Canada had a couple articles about it and said, listen, eventually this woke mob is going to rue the day. Because what happens? Because when they eventually, if they get too much power, they come for each other and they start turning on each other. So I mentioned this last week. Melanie Phillips had a good article at the Times of London about how this anti-Western ideology is influencing a seminar. Here's a thing from Fathom. This is an education publication. And this is a former public servant in the UK who's published a scandalous indoctrination inside a King's College counterterrorism course for UK civil servants. And it focused on one guy and how he was concerned that the terrorism were like actually focusing on a certain religion terrorism and not the conservative far right people that he really considers to be the terrorists. And the Times UK published his letter to the editor about that. NBC News had this week. Disinformation, this is along the lines of what Ursula von der Leyen was speaking about at Davos. Disinformation poses an unprecedented threat in 2024, and the U.S. is less ready than ever. So this is NBC News, and look at some of the things that they say in this article. Disinformation poses an unprecedented threat to democracy in the United States in 2024, according to researchers, technologists, and political scientists, which all belong to the woke mob, and they sort of publish, the peer review people that are reviewing their articles and their research just sort of let them get away with slander and libel of other people in the culture. As the presidential election approaches, experts warn that a convergence of events at home and abroad on traditional social media and amid an environment of rising authoritarianism, deep distrust, and political social unrest makes the dangers from propaganda, falsehoods, and conspiracy theories more dire than ever. So it's like almost everybody that Ursula von der Leyen, Klaus Schwab, and other people, we're going to make them all, we're sort of going to give a group guest prophecy updater award because they're looking at the apocalypse coming in the elections around the world this fall as authoritarianism rises. Scammers have found success with so-called deep fakes, mostly in manufacturing AI-generated videos of celebrities hawking products like health supplements or cryptocurrency. An increasing number of voters have proven susceptible to disinformation from former President Trump and his allies. Artificial intelligence technology is ubiquitous. Social media companies have slashed efforts to rein in misinformation on their platforms, and attacks on the work and reputation of academics tracking disinformation have chilled research. Good. Go get a real job. Even as campaigns begin to use AI in ads and states rush to legislate around them, the much publicized threat of the technology to elections has yet to materialize. But it's coming, and it's going to be the people that we don't agree with. They're the ones who are going to be doing it. Like the whole Russian hoax. I mean, in the 2016 election, proven fake, proven false, proven made up. But you need to worry about, so again, it's the situation where you're being warned about disinformation and misinformation by the biggest purveyors of misinformation and disinformation. So just keep that in mind as you analyze what's going on. More often, cheap AI is being used to create propaganda, mostly from Trump loyalists. Let's see. Read that already. And Jim Jordan, there's this letter that he sent out to the AML officer of Plaid Inc. in San Francisco on January 17th. We now know the federal government, you need to go up. Thank you. We need to now, the federal government flagged terms like MAGA and Trump to financial institutions if America completed transactions using those terms. Were you aware of that? The federal government is doing that? Do you think they're doing it to Black Lives Matters, Antifa, Alex Soros, you know? What was also flagged? If you bought a religious tech like a Bible or shopped at Bass Pro Shops, or even worse, Cabela's. You're really dangerous. So this is his heads of a committee or subcommittee on the weaponization of the legal system. This is from Neiman Lab. This was cited in the Washington Post this week. It says, asking people to do the research on fake news stories makes them seem more believable, not less. In other words, don't do your own research to find out if something you read is true or not, because you might actually end up believing it. Because when you look at it, the way the search results comes up, it just confirms what you believe to be true. Oh, like the whole academic research thing isn't designed to do the exact same thing on the other side of the issue. We're in a really bad position. This is an article from the Washington Post. Silicon Valley insiders hope to unseat Biden with an AI-backed challenger. So there's a guy, what's his name, Dean Phillips or something. He's challenging. Biden, and so they're going to try to pump him up using AI-generated information and ads and videos and that type of thing. So it's going to be crazy for the next year. And I don't see that the world ever goes back to anything resembling normal. Like I remember, and TV shows have always been pushing an agenda. Remember, MASH was always pushing an anti-war agenda, making up stories about the Korean War. And we liked the characters and everything, so we watch everything. But it was like training us. So one of the guys who was invited to speak is a populist guy who was elected to be the president of Argentina. And this is where it can get a bit confusing. So and it's interesting, he got invited to speak at Davos. Why? Because now they're trying to open it up. Like, look how open-minded we are. We have these people come in that we don't agree with. And it's interesting, the word is that when this guy got up to speak, by his second or third sentence, the hall had pretty much emptied out as he spoke. I'm trying to remember his name right now. So here's Klaus Schwab introducing him. Then you're going to hear a little bit of his talk with a translation, because he spoke in Spanish. He does not speak English. So listen to this.
So we have a very extraordinary person among us today. And of course, we are all eager to listen to you. And again, a very cordial welcome to the World Economic Forum.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Hoy estoy acá
Today, I'm here
para decirles que Occidente
to tell you that the Western world is in danger.
está en peligro
And it is endangered because those who are supposed to have to defend the values of the West are co-opted by a vision of the world that inexorably leads to socialism and thereby to poverty.
Lamentablemente,
Unfortunately,
en las últimas
in
décadas,
recent decades,
motivados por algunos deseos
motivated by some well-meaning individuals willing to help others, and others motivated by the wish to belong to a privileged caste, the main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We're here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world. Rather, they are the root cause. Do believe me, no one better placed than us, Argentines, to testify to these 2 points.
So this guy's not very popular at the World Economic Forum. But again, they did this to sort of soften us up a little bit and to get us to kind of, oh, well, look how nice they are. They have Guy comes who's a populist and he's okay. Now, so that was what went out on the live stream. This is what it sounded like when he was in the hall speaking in Spanish.
Ya sea que se declamen abiertamente comunistas, fascistas, nazis, socialistas, socialdemócratas, nacionalsocialistas, demócratas cristianos, keynesianos, neo-keynesianos, progresistas, populistas.
So in other words, you can kind of make some of the words out because we're familiar a little bit with Spanish. But then someone took this, and if you miss the front part of this will tell you this is AI generated, but this is the guy speaking in his voice in English with his mouth moving. This is pretty good. Now, there's a disclaimer at the front. This is AI generated and everything, but just look at this a little bit.
Today, I am present to inform you that the Western world is facing a significant threat. It is in danger because those who are supposed to defend the values of the Western world are co-opted by a world that inevitably leads to socialism and consequently to poverty and economic deprivation. Unfortunately, in recent decades, motivated by some well-intentioned desires to help others and others by the desire to belong to a privileged caste, the main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We are here to tell you that experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world, but rather they are their cause.
Now you can go find that. It's the speech that broke the internet. You can find it on YouTube and watch all 18 or 20 minutes. And that's pretty good. You see how his mouth was moving? And it was like in his voice with his own inflections, like a Spanish person speaking English. But it's a made up video. And while they did accurately put up what he said, you can see the translation and the transcript on the original on the World Economic Forum YouTube channel. And then you go down in the notes and there's a thing down there that says show transcript. Click on that and you can see the words pop up, the translation. It's pretty scary to understand that this is somebody, I don't know, this guy could have been in his garage or basement or something putting this together and publishing it on the internet. But what if he did it to fake what the guy said in the midst of an election? And I see this on Twitter all the time now. Somebody will put up a video of someone and immediately somebody will dub it to German or Spanish or Ukrainian or Russian or any other language almost immediately. It's pretty amazing what happens. Now, Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan Chase, was there, and he was interviewed on CNBC. And look, the stock market hit an all-time high on Friday, all-time record high. So it's, but a lot of people are nervous about where it's going. And Jamie Dimon had some very direct comments to the people at Davos and the host at CNBC. And I think it's worth listening to what he has to say.
I think it's a mistake to assume that everything's hunky-dory. And, and when stock markets are up, it's kind of like this little drug we all feel. Like, it's just great, But remember, we've had so much fiscal and monetary stimulation. So I'm a little more on the cautious side, that we are facing a lot of things in 24 or 25. And we mentioned Ukraine, the terrorist activity in Israel, the Red Sea, quantitative tightening, which I still question if we understand exactly how that works. I don't think we do. How QE actually worked, what the effect of negative, zero rates was for all this time, and obviously the politics, and and then the Ukrainian war is affecting oil, gas, food, migration. So you have all these very powerful forces that are going to be affecting us in 24 and 25. So if I was the government, I would be preparing for what I'm going to do about that, assuming things aren't good. And I just also want to point out, I wish the Democrats would think a little more carefully when they talk about MAGA, and if you travel this country, and the country's unbelievable. We took our bus trip this year and Leslie Picker was on Spokane and Boise and Bozeman, people are growing. They're hungry to grow. They're innovating. It's everywhere. It's not just Silicon Valley. So we've got this great hand. But when people say MAGA, they're actually looking at people voting for Trump, and they think they're voting, and they're basically scapegoating them that you are like him. But I don't think they're voting for Trump because of his family values. And if you look, just take a step back, be honest. He was kind of right about NATO, kind of right about immigration. He grew the economy quite well.
China virus.
Tax reform worked. He was right about some of China. I don't like what he did.
No, I said China virus.
Yeah, I understand. He may have been right. And I don't like how he said things about Mexico. I don't like, but he wasn't wrong about some of these critical issues. And that's why they're voting for him. And I think people should be a little more respectful of our fellow citizens. And when you guys have people up here, you should always ask the why. Not like it's a binary thing. You're supporting Trump, you're not supporting Trump. Why are you supporting Trump?
It's hard to hate 75 million of your fellow Americans. And
I agree.
It's done
and the Democrats have done a pretty good job with the deplorables, hugging onto their Bibles and their beer and their guns. I mean, really, like, can we just stop that stuff and actually grow up and treat other people with respect and listen to them a little bit? And I do think the economy will affect. And I think this negative talk about MAGA is going to hurt Biden's election campaign.
I just want to ask you back to the 34 trillion that we got, because it seemed like when rates were going up and we thought the Fed was going to keep going higher for longer, it looked like some of that was coming home to roost because the auctions weren't going well. It's like, wow, debt service is much more expensive. This is going to hurt. Suddenly the pat answer is, wow, we're already through that. Rates are coming down again. So the 34 trillion suddenly is okay again. And I don't think it works that way.
Yeah, I think people are making a mistake. I think it is going to come to bite. That could be in 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. I think it may very well bite in the markets way before that, because the market makers don't have because of regulations, don't have the capability to make markets like you used to. So we can easily handle it, but we're restricted by all these rules. And you're absolutely correct. If my numbers are right, in 1980, debt to GDP was 35%. We spent 5% of the deficit because of recession. Now debt to GDP is 100%. The deficit's 6%, and it's in a boom time. And of course, it feels pretty good because we spend all that money. It seems to be working. I think governments are starting to feel omnipotent, and central banks. I'd be much more cautious about that.
Pretty good words. I mean, that's bravo. And by the way, there's some thinking that he's thinking of running for president in 2028. I think right now, I don't know how old he is. He's probably approaching 70. I think he's around my age. So he's going to run in 2028 because he's not old enough to run for president yet. We got to get a geezer thing in there. Now, also at the World Economic Forum, they had Kevin Roberts from the Heritage Foundation who spoke on a panel, and he was questioned by a guy. And I think there was like a fire in the hall when this happened, but this was worth replaying. You can get the whole video if you want, but this is just a couple, 3 minutes.
One thing that Davos, you might say, and the people come here stand up for, is liberal democracy.
It's laughable that you would, or anyone would, describe Davos as protecting liberal democracy. I'll be candid here because I think I've been invited here to be candid. Elites tell us that open borders and even illegal immigration are okay. The average person tells us in the United States that both rob them of the American way of life. Elites also tell us that public safety isn't a problem in big American cities. Just travel to New York or Washington or Dallas, Texas. The average person will tell you that the lack of public safety damages not just the American way of life, but their life. Elites tell us that we have this existential crisis with so-called climate change. The solutions, the average person know, cost more human lives, especially in Europe during the time that you need heating, than do the problem and the problems themselves. The fourth, China. The number one adversary, not just to the United States, but to free people on planet Earth. Not only do we at Davos not say that, we give the Chinese Communist Party a platform. And fifth, as we sit here, another supranational organization, the World Health Organization, is discussing foisting gender ideology upon the global South. These are practices that are under review, if not being rejected, by countries in Northern Europe. The new president, especially if it's President Trump, will, as you like to say, trust the science. He will understand the basic biological reality of manhood and womanhood. And do you know why? Not because of retribution, not because he's a dictator, but because he has the power of the American people behind him. But let me just correct the slight assertion you made there. We want Ukraine to win. We want to see Ukraine win with a lot more help from European allies. I think the United States has a role. Heritage has been clear about this for 2 years now, that there is a world in which we support military aid for Ukraine. Our first obligation in foreign policy is to look at it through the lens of what's best for the American citizen. Joe Biden has done a god-awful job in articulating what that is. The kind of person who will come into the next conservative administration is going to be governed by one principle, and that is destroying the grasp that political elites and unelected technocrats have over the average person. And if I may, I will be candid and say that the agenda that every single member of the administration needs to have is to compile a list of everything that's ever been proposed at the World Economic Forum and object to all of them wholesale.
Maybe he should run. Right. So there were crazy people and when they talked about climate change and that type of thing. So they had a shamanist. Did you see that thing? And the ladies running around coughing on people with a mask on. It's just, it's crazy. Okay. So they had the high priestess of witchcraft or whatever it is there. So here's a lady talking about climate change, and look at the term. I'd not really heard this term before, but it's a thing now. Here she goes.
Since we have to accelerate action and ambition from all sides, not only business, governments as well. And I think also there's a lot of individual change that we have to promote to just really get where we need to get. So you work on a very new concept called ecocide. So many people don't understand what this legal definition is and what does it bring. So can you please explain a little bit to us, but also tell us, in your opinion, what has to change in current business and investment models to make sure this long-term thinking and ecological considerations are included in decisions and practices?
Absolutely. So, ecocide as a word is becoming better known around the world, and the concept is generally mass damage and destruction of nature. But legally speaking, what our organization and other collaborators aim to do is to have this recognized legally as a serious crime. Because one of the issues that sort of pervades all of this discussion is that we have a kind of cultural, very ingrained habit of not taking damage to nature as seriously as we take damage to people and property. And that, if you're campaigning for human rights, at least you know mass murder, torture, all of these things are serious crimes. But there's no equivalent in the environmental space. Unlike an international crime like genocide that involves a specific intent, with ecocide, what we see is actually what people are trying to do, what businesses are trying to do is make money, is farm, is fish, is do all of these things that are, producing energy and so on as well. But what's missing is the awareness and the conscience around the side effects, around the collateral damage that happens with that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We got to stop because we're all stupider for having listened to that talk. So this was another forum at the World Economic Forum, Preparing for Disease X. And this is Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization. Here's the introduction to his panel and a little bit about what Dr. Tedros, a radical communist, Marxist, Leninist, whatever you want to call him, it's all true, what he has to say. And so here, the intro to the panel and then a minute or so of Tedros. Bear with me, it ends.
It's my pleasure to welcome you to this very important discussion this morning. We have a catchy title, but I think what's behind it is basically how do we prepare for next emergency? How do we prepare our health system overall for next pandemic? We all know very well, there will be viruses, there will be pathogens, there will be outbreaks. The idea is how do we prepare to contain those? How do we prepare outbreaks from becoming full-blown pandemics?
If I may, although
COVID came immediately, we were preparing for COVID-like disease. You may even call COVID as the first disease X. And it may happen again. Of course, there are some people who say, oh, this may create panic. No. It's better actually to anticipate something that may happen, because it has happened in our history many times, and prepare for it. We shouldn't face things unprepared. We can prepare for some unknown things as well, because there are basic things you can do. Then that takes me to your question, of course. Then we should prepare means it could be an early warning system that could be installed. And then preparedness planning. For instance, with COVID, we have seen it in preparedness planning when our hospitals were stretched beyond their capacity, but both in terms of space and also workforce. How can you have a surge when anything comes, you can expand quickly so you can manage your patients?
Okay, so let's do a little early warning system here. We'll be warning you early about any authoritarians that want to take control of everything in the world. Look, this is all part of end time stuff. So early warning, that guy, don't trust him. He wants to take control of everything in the World Health Organization and this supposed treaty that they're putting in, which will never be voted on, at least with the current administration. The Biden administration will never put it up for a vote in front of Congress. They will just put the whole bureaucracy against it. Now, there's very encouraging. There's a case in front of the Supreme Court that had oral arguments this week where they're talking about, listen, Congress enacts these laws and then the regulatory agencies just decide how they're going to make up regulations. So now there's a question, is that constitutional? And it's a Chevron case to give deference to the government agencies. Those days may be coming to an end. So there's good news here, but one of the things is we need to act as an early warning system to this guy and what he wants to do. And then this was the thing, fossil fuels. Everybody talks about fossil fuels. Now, I lean to the thing that this is a paper, Abiogenic Deep Origin of Hydrocarbons and Oil and Gas Deposits Formation, that this actually comes from processes that are taking place deep in the earth. And so the oil will be replenished. Some things won't be, like coal, okay? But oil and gas, they come from processes in the earth. And some people say, well, if you're pulling too many out, they can't replenish quickly enough. And other people say, no, that's not the case. And by the way, the Russians adopt this view completely. And I use the term fossil fuels. It doesn't mean I think they come from dead dinosaurs. In fact, somebody posted this thing, is dinosaur DNA and fossil fuel? It's a good question. Was anybody done the research on that? And then this guy, Robin Monte, why natural gas is the cleanest energy source, composed primarily of methane. The main products of the combustion of natural gas are carbon dioxide and water vapor, the same compounds we exhale when we breathe. That one compound is not a pollutant. Its increase in the atmosphere has been wrongly blamed for everything. And then somebody down here had this great response to this. Hydrogen carbons are fossil fuels. That's why we find them on satellites and planets throughout the solar system and throughout the cosmos, because those dinosaurs knew how to do space travel. So that's one of, that's a great, sarcastic, truthful, and I love sarcasm in its proper context. And that guy nailed it. Bravo to Marco Williams. Go follow him on Twitter because he seems like a smart guy. So one of the guys who didn't speak at Davos this week was our friend, Noah Yuval Harari. But fortunately, he did an interview on the DOAC YouTube channel. I'm going to just play a couple minutes of it because he's asking about, artificial intelligence and human evolution and what does this mean for the future of humanity. And of course, Dr. Harari has an opinion, and it's DOAC is Diary of a CEO. That's the name of the YouTube channel, and you can find it. Oh, by the way, somebody also said here in the discussion about gas and oil and that type of thing, saying that if more people start using electronic EVs, electric vehicles, that will drop the demand for gas. And the guy said, you may see $1 a gallon gas before too long. I paid $1.98 recently here in Central Ohio. They're having a bit of a gas war up here at the Marengo exit on 71. And then people are going to say, well, wait a minute, why am I charging this vehicle at a cost when I could buy gas much more cheaply? And it kind of has a synergy effect. And the elites, they're going to go crazy. They're not going to figure out that. I don't know if I shared this last week, but saw somebody in Saskatchewan, Canada, charging an electric vehicle. The business was closed, so the guy had to sit in his car. It's 35 below, so he has to have the car running, and that makes the charge go longer. He'd been there for like 4 hours. He was at 2/3 of charging, which isn't going to get him all the way into Saskatoon and back home. He's going to have to charge it again, and he'd already spent $100 on charging. And he's just sitting in his car, freezing, trying not to turn the heat up too much, which runs on electric. So here's Dr. Harari being asked about the future of humanity. This is a pretty good interview.
That's kind of one of the messages that when I connect the dots throughout your work, and you look off into the future, I'm left feeling. And even you think about the modern problems we have, those are typically consequences of our ability to believe in stories and to believe in fictions. And if you play that forward 100 years, maybe 200 years, you don't believe that, you believe we'll be the last of our species, right?
I think we are very near the kind of end of our species. It doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be destroyed in some huge nuclear war or something like that. It could very well mean that we'll just change ourselves using bioengineering and using AI and brain-computer interfaces. We will change ourselves to such an extent that we'll become something completely different, something far more different from present-day Homo sapiens than we today are different from chimpanzees or from Neanderthals. I mean, basically, you have a very deep connection still with all the other animals because we are completely organic. We are organic entities. Our psychology, our social habits, they are the product of organic evolution and more specifically mammalian evolution over tens of millions of years. So we share so much of our psychology and of our kind of social habits with chimpanzees and with other mammals. Looking 100 years or 200 years to the future, maybe we are no longer organic or not fully organic. You could have a world dominated by cyborgs, which are entities combining organic with inorganic parts, for instance, with brain-computer interfaces. You could have completely non-organic entities. So all the legacy and also all the limitations of 4 billion years of organic evolution might be irrelevant or inapplicable to the beings of the future.
What bet would you make? Because you're saying maybe here.
I don't know. I mean, we could destroy ourselves. I think there is a greater, to completely destroy every last single human in the world, it is possible, given the technology that we now command, but it's very difficult.
So he's fully adopted the logistics part of my little prophecy paradigm. It's tough to do, but it could be done, and he's got an opinion on how this is going to work. So let's talk about Middle East. This is from the Atlantic Council, the lessons Washington needs to learn from the strike on the Houthis. More Red Sea attacks are likely. You see these articles everywhere. So this is a map of the world, and here are the major choke points. You've got the Panama Canal. You've got the, I forget the name of the cape at the south of South America, Cape of Good Hope in Africa. And then you have the major ones like in Europe and Asia. You've got the Straits of Gibraltar. You've got up there in Denmark. And that's how Russia gets to the ocean. They got to go through a very narrow passageway. You also have the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea. And then you also have the Mandab Straits and the Strait of Hormuz and also the Black Sea area. And the interesting thing is these are major shipping choke points, and it's a lot of these are under control of Muslim countries and allies of Iran. This is a problem. So we're having a lot of trouble in the Red Sea. This is a little graphic from the New York Times today about the shipping. The purple is how shipping is going since the Houthis started their attacks, and the green would show what was like before. So a lot of ships are being diverted, and it's an extra 4,000 miles, 10 days, extra cost, like 40% extra shipping cost. You can see here the price of shipping, although it's gone up a good bit recently. It's not as much as it was back during the shipping strikes. And the U.S. has carried out strikes, but they don't seem to make any sense. It's like the people in charge or the guy in charge can't think it through. So they'll shoot down a missile, but they don't shoot the missile. Well, they did finally. They don't shoot the missile at the place where the missile was shot from. They'll shoot down the missile, spending $2 million. Well, why don't you just send a missile in and blow up where they're launching this thing from? Wouldn't that shoot down the missile, of course, but also do this? And this is an interesting graphic or editorial cartoon from an Arab paper. And you see that's the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia. And it's like the whole thing is on fire. And this is the way this is going. A lot of people have thought that. There was a U.S.-owned cargo vessel. And even China's coming out and saying, hey, listen, guys, back off. This is attacking our shipping. Now, there's an excellent article that Caroline Glick wrote this week at JNS, Jewish News Syndicate. A link to it is in the notes, the description of the show. I'm not going to go through it, but essentially what she's talking about, you should go and read it. I think it's an important article. It's well-reasoned. Is Blinken's running around telling, and the U.S. people are running around. In fact, there's where would I see that? There is a article. Excuse me. Washington Post this morning, the high-stakes diplomatic scramble to avert the Israel-Lebanon war. And Blinken's going to say, we need a two-state solution. We need a two-state solution. He went to the Economic Forum and he spoke. I'll play you a clip of that here in just a moment. And it's like the U.S. and government Netanyahu are not getting along. They haven't spoken to Netanyahu. Biden hasn't for about 3 weeks now. In the last conversation, I think Netanyahu said did not end well. And so the question is, why are we pushing this Palestinian state? This is like, it doesn't work. It's not worked. It's been rejected every time. But now this time we're going to do the same thing that's not worked for 75 years, and this time it's going to work. And Israel's now in the second longest war that they've ever been involved in. So here's Blinken, interviewed by Tom Friedman from the New York Times at Davos this week.
Look, these are decisions for Israelis to make. This is a profound decision for the country as a whole to make. What direction does it want to take? Can it seize the opportunity that we believe is there? And they'll have to make those decisions. Anyone who's in office, faced with this is an inflection point. President Biden talks about this often. It's an inflection point geostrategically. I think it's also an inflection point in the Middle East. And And when you get to an inflection point, you have to make hard decisions.
And it's not just an inflection point, it's a prophecy point, I think. The Secretary of State returned to Washington. This is Caroline's article. The official said, having been rebuffed by Netanyahu on all but one of the administration's asks, and understanding that Israel would not attack Hezbollah and Lebanon, at least not right away, although that seems to be changing. So here's another clip of Blinken and Tom Friedman.
When we talk about a transformed Palestinian Authority, Mr. Secretary, it seems to me, in many ways, it's the answer to, now that I hear you, 4 challenges Israel faces. That is, right now, challenge number 1, since October 7th, Israel's lost the narrative in this war. That's how it's ended up in the World Court, number 1. Number 2, it went to war without any vision of the morning after or a Palestinian partner that could help it govern Gaza. Number 3, we're trying to put together a regional alliance to deal with threats from Houthis and Hezbollah, which can only be dealt with through a regional alliance. And that requires a Palestinian component. So when you think about it, a credible, legitimate Palestinian state in peace with Israel becomes the answer to all 3 of those questions. You've just said that's a challenge this prime minister will have to rise to. Do we have the Palestinian leadership for that? And when we talk about a transformed Palestinian Authority, what do we mean? What are we looking for?
So, again, we don't purport to make these decisions for others. There have to be ways, means, vehicles for Palestinians to make these decisions. But I think what we're talking about is 2 things. You're talking about a government, and a structure of governance that maximizes the ability of the authority to actually deliver what the Palestinian people want and need. But it also has to be able to operate in what you might call a permissive environment. In other words, with the support of, with the help of Israel, not with its active opposition. Because even the most effective authority is going to have a lot of trouble if it's got the active opposition of any Israeli government.
Okay, so Tom Friedman, he's got his usual, by the way, I apologize to the world. If we just sort of get the normal views on a YouTube video that we put up, a prophecy update we put up, more people probably will hear from Tom Friedman than have heard from him in many, many decades. People don't usually pay that much attention to him. And now here I am citing an article he wrote this morning. Netanyahu is turning against Biden. But the interesting blurb out of the article is, and a legitimate Palestinian partner would give cover for a regional alliance. Go over to the right, quote, please. Regional alliance of Americans, NATO, and pro-Western Arab states would help deter Hezbollah and confront the Houthis. So sort of talking about a Middle East NATO. And that's kind of interesting when we talk about alliances and Psalm 83 and kingdoms and a lot of these things coming together. There's another editorial in the New York Times this morning talking about that. So this was another discussion. This is the Saudi foreign minister speaking on a panel about international security, and he was really the first one to speak. So here we go.
Was it necessary to take the steps we did know? Are you supportive of them? And
talking about the Houthis,
you have been trying to rein in the Houthis for quite a while, haven't you?
I think we're incredibly concerned for regional security in general, and of course, freedom of navigation in the Red Sea is something that impacts all of us. And we think the priority needs to be de-escalation in the Red Sea, but in the entire region. And we are going to engage to make that happen. And part of that, of course, is also making sure that we engage with all stakeholders.
How connected is this with the war in Gaza?
I mean, it's clearly connected, given that it's coming in that context. And in any case, we need to focus on the war in Gaza, not because of the Red Sea. We need to focus on the war in Gaza because of its impact on the Palestinians first, but on regional security in general and on the risks that it poses for further escalation. And, we've seen now close to 30,000 civilians killed in Gaza. We continue to see civilians being killed every day. We continue to see restrictions on access to humanitarian aid. And frankly, we don't see any real sign that any strategic objectives that Israel has claimed are being coming any closer. So we need to have a ceasefire immediately. We need to set the ground for a credible process that enables the Palestinian Authority, that allows us to have a process towards a peace in the region. This will resolve many of the challenges that we have in the region. But continuing as we are now, continuing to see the suffering that's happening in Gaza is likely to lead to continuing cycles of escalation.
So another interview he gave.
President has described Saudi Arabia as key to anything after that crisis, after the war in Gaza. What does Saudi Arabia need to see to be part of that future?
So, just to begin, you described it as a crisis. It's actually a catastrophe. What's happening in Gaza is a humanitarian catastrophe by all measures. 30,000 civilians have died, and we continue to see death, destruction, and suffering by the civilian population of Gaza, by the Israeli war machine, but also by the lack of access for humanitarian aid. So, what we need immediately is a ceasefire and access for humanitarian aid. People are starving in Gaza, and we are seeing disease break out. We need to see access for humanitarian aid at the levels that the United Nations require. The only way we can credibly address the aftermath of what has happened in Gaza is if we address it in the context of the whole Palestinian situation. And here, what we need is to talk about Palestinian statehood. But what we feel is key at this time is to find a credible, irreversible path to a Palestinian state. And I think irreversible is the thing we need to underline, because that's been lacking in the past. I mean, we have said before that we are prepared to move towards establishing diplomatic relations with Israel, provided that we have addressed the issue of Palestine and a Palestinian state. That remains the case. But we do need to see the formation of a Palestinian state, a credible pathway to that before we can confirm or move forward on all of these issues. This has become even more important now. And by the way, I feel that is not just in the interest of the region, that's in the interest of all of the global community.
So this was a front page in the Financial Times on Friday. Arab nations develop a strategy to end Gaza war and create a Palestinian state. So there's a coalition of Arab countries, and included with this, if you read the article, is normalization with Israel. So that's not off the table, but in the context of all these other things going on, I think this is kind of a big deal. And as I kind of researched back, there was a article put up at Huffington Post. Now, I don't usually read that, but this tweet by the author, Akbar Saeed Ahmed, or whatever how you would say it. You can read it there. It's in English, and I don't speak Arabic. It's not my first language. English barely is, at least sometimes. But a top Biden official, Brett McGurk, is pushing an urgent post-Gaza plan that's alarming some insiders. And McGurk envisions a Jerusalem-Jeddah pact. That's kind of an interesting. So Jerusalem here, where Al-Aqsa is, in the Grand Mosque in Mecca, near Jeddah, next to Jeddah, down there on the Red Sea. That's what they're calling a Jerusalem-Jeddah pact. That would be between Israel and Saudi Arabia, being pushed by the U.S. government. And the Saudis haven't completely rejected it, but it would lead to the creation of a Palestinian state. And this thing that I talked about, this is consistent with the Trump plan that was put out 4 years ago. I think 4 years ago tomorrow. I think it was on January 22nd in 2020. And so here it is, they envisioned a Palestinian state connected to Jordan, connected to Gaza. And then there would be an industrial and agricultural enclave down in the Negev that Israel would cede over to the Palestinians. A little bit closer view of it. So they're talking about it, but again, you got to have a credible Palestinian partner, and that's the problem. Israel is it has a lot of unity. It appears, from my observation, that there's some fraying around the edges of that unity. People don't like Prime Minister Netanyahu, especially in America. Here's a New Yorker article, The Price of Netanyahu's Ambition. And so there's a lot of talk. What happened on that? Is there a rift in the war cabinet? That's from the Jerusalem Post on Friday. This is Jerusalem Post Friday also. The Netanyahu era is over on the front page. The country marked the birthday of a young boy who was taken hostage on October 7th, who turned 1, assuming he's still alive. We don't know. It's very... There's a podcast I listened to, and the guy is kind of what I would call center left. It's Dan Senor, Senor. Call Me Back. You can get it on Apple Podcast. And I was listening to this overnight, and they had a lady talking who had prepared the bodies for burial. Caroline Glick interviewed, you remember Jeremy Gimpel, who spoke here years ago. His sister-in-law, she was started preparing bodies for burial. This is very important in the Jewish religion, respect for the body. And so this lady was on the podcast, Sherry Mendez, and she was usually working with female soldiers. And go listen to the podcast. I don't want to describe it here. I think you need to know what's going on. On my Facebook page, I put up a link to some Israeli government website that's been put in place to look, to document what happened on October 7th. And all these people say, well, where are the women that were really raped? Why aren't they coming out and testifying? Well, they're dead. You understand? They're dead. And it's the people who prepared the bodies who can tell you what happened. And this lady on Call Me Back podcast, she said, I was listening to it this morning, and just kind of ruined, it can ruin your morning. So, know that you're going to hear this. And she was saying it's just it seems to be a very systematic mutilation of the bodies, like they were really trying to do that. So there's stories all over the place. And Netanyahu, this is Financial Times, Netanyahu cabinet split breaks into the open, the Times of the UK. So there's a lot going, and Caroline kind of picks up this one in her article. And she's just saying is, the U.S. is kind of pushing us to do this thing with the Palestinians. And everybody knows that's not going to work. President Herzog of Israel spoke at Davos, and he said, listen, there's nobody in Israel that really thinks we can do anything with the Palestinian Authority or even a reconstituted Palestinian Authority. They pay terrorists every month that have killed Israelis, not just Jewish Israelis, but Israelis. We can't do business with these people. It's not going to work. But the world seems to be on a track where they're going to, I think, maybe try to force this down Israel's throat in some way. And so I talked last week about the Jonathan Spire article, great article, Long Fight to Disarm Hamas. In the New York Times the other day, they had an article about the Gaza tunnels and some of the things that are coming to light there. And what you're finding there is that, they thought there were 300 kilometers of tunnels. What's that, 185 miles? Now they're thinking like it maybe more like 450 miles of tunnels, 5,700 entry points. Well, if you did 50 a day, that's 100 days just to destroy 50 a day. And that won't even get them all. So this is going to be in for the long haul. There we go, 450 miles, 5,700 entrances. There's a lot of stories. This gal, you might remember the video of her being kidnapped on the motorcycle. She was forced to do a video this week by Hamas to say that 2 of the people kidnapped with her are now dead. And the other thing is that I noticed this, I said this the other day to someone, it's like, how are they still firing rockets from northern Gaza when the place has been obliterated? And the answer is they have a lot of weapons. Hamas has said we can go for months and months and months. So this is not going to end anytime soon. Now, Gallant is, he's positive. We're going to get this under control. This is the Wall Street Journal this morning. Hamas told us far falls short of Israel's war aims. The U.S. government says Israel forces have killed 20 to 30% of Hamas fighters. U.S. intelligence agencies estimate a total falls short so far of Israel's goal of destroying the group and shows its resilience after months of war that have laid swaths of the Gaza Strip to ruin. The U.S. estimate of the group's casualties also found that Hamas still has enough munitions to continue striking Israel and Israeli forces in Gaza for months, and that the group is attempting to reconstitute its police force in parts of Gaza City, according to U.S. officials who confirmed a classified report that the Wall Street Journal had been told about or got a chance to see. Look, that's the problem. They've withdrawn some from the northern part. People are coming back and the terrorists are coming back with them. And it's rinse, repeat, and the cycle just continues to go on. Here's a picture of some of the destruction in one of the parts of the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And people are coming back. But understand too, a lot of these things were left standing, but they're finding that a third of the hospitals or 2/3 of the hospitals, 2/3 of the schools, 2/3 of the playgrounds were all terror centers. Here's a little discussion on JNS. Well, I'll play this. I have one other thing I'll go after that, I think. But here's JNS talking about what do we do the day after Hamas? What's going to happen? Good discussion, JNS and the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Here we go.
The day after Hamas. Yoni, what do you think about the day after Hamas? Is the day after what Israel should be doing now?
There is no day after Hamas because Hamas is not going anywhere. It's not going to disappear. It's very obvious that the objectives of the war, Israeli objectives of the war, are not focused well enough because you cannot destroy Hamas as a movement. Hamas is not only a terror organization, it's also a political movement. So you cannot uproot the ideas of Hamas, the ideology of Hamas against Israel, against the Jews from the minds of the Palestinians. This is impossible to do. What you can do is destroy the military infrastructure of Hamas in the Gaza Strip and kill the military leaders of the military arm of Hamas. This is possible. But to uproot the ideas of Hamas from the minds of the Palestinians, I think this is impossible to do.
Khaled, what do you think? Are you on line with Yoni?
Yes, I totally agree. I think we are now more than 100 days after the war. We see that Israel has managed to destroy some of the Hamas military capabilities, some of their governmental capabilities, but it will take a long time before you can destroy Hamas totally. As a governing power in Gaza. Now the question is, how long will that take? I don't think that a short-term military operation in Gaza can achieve these two goals, by the way. Hamas is now hoping or betting on Israel, leaving the Gaza Strip sooner or later. The way they see it is that it's only a matter of time before Israel leaves Gaza and we're back to square one. So it depends. I believe that if you want to destroy Hamas military and governmental capabilities, you need to stay there for at least 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But a limited military operation is not going to achieve its goals. Now we have another problem, which, as Yoni said, you destroy Hamas's military and governmental capabilities, but what about the ideology of Hamas? What about the fact that Hamas is in the hearts and minds of most of the people in Gaza? How do you get rid of that? That can be done only through a process of de-radicalization, and that will take even more time. It will probably take another generation or to
at least 2 generations
to get rid of the Hamas ideology, and that also depends, Dan, on who is running Gaza. if you're going to hand the Gaza Strip over to someone affiliated with Hamas or even to the Palestinian Authority, you're going to go back to square one, because both of them are, they're very anti-Israel. They're both spreading the same hate messages against Israel. And sometimes it's even difficult to distinguish between the Palestinian authorities and Hamas's rhetoric.
Well, that's exactly why Israeli government leaders, beginning with the prime minister, have said that they are unwilling to allow the return of the Palestinian Authority, which is, as Khalid said, is no better rhetorically or even ideologically than the Hamas. The American people and the American administration misunderstand this point. The PA is not more moderate ideologically or rhetorically. They may not be sending suicide bombers or rockets, but they certainly are inciting to terror assaults. They are incentivizing to terror assaults through this pay for slay. What they have, the Martyrs Fund. So Yoni, how do you square the circle? Khalid Al-Jami says he agrees with you. He says that there is no day after Hamas, because Hamas will always leave a legacy, political legacy, governmental legacy, ideological legacy. But on the other hand, the PA, unfortunately, which is misunderstood in the West, is no better than the Hamas. So what corner is Israel standing in right now?
I think, in my estimation, the Israeli political echelon is making a huge mistake by fighting with the American administration about the issue of the PA as the body that will be responsible for the Gaza Strip. And I tell you why. The Americans, I heard President Biden saying that they want a revitalized PA to control the Gaza Strip. Why Israel is objecting that? Because what is revitalized? The Americans are talking about a PA that will not support terrorism, that will not incite against Israel. So this is a good thing for Israel. Why Israel is objecting that? I don't understand. And we all know, and I think the Americans also know, maybe it's just because of the presidential elections in the United States that President Biden is saying these things. But they know that the PA will not change. The Americans are asking for reforms in the PA for the last 3 years. And Abu Mazen, the head of the PA, Mahmoud Abbas, is cheating the Americans, sending them back and forth. They will never do these reforms.
Yeah, so you just contradicted yourself.
I'm not contradicting. So I'm saying, why Israel insists on this? Israel should say yes to Biden. Okay, bring us the revitalized.
Oh, you mean the Palestinians will cancel themselves out?
Of course.
What Yoni is saying is that Israel can always rely on the Palestinians. Say no.
That's Abu Eben. And that's Abu Eben.
After the Camp David, I'll tell you a story. After the Camp David summit in 2000 with President Clinton, Yasser Arafat, and Ehud Barak as prime minister, I had a very good friend who deceased. Uri Dan was his name.
Oh, yes.
Of course, you remember him. So
writer in the Jerusalem Post, very frequently.
And everybody was very upset that the summit failed and there was no peace. The Intifada didn't start yet, the second Intifada. But Uri Dan, he said, it's a good thing that what happened. We will build a big statue for Yasser Arafat in the center of Jerusalem. I said, why? Why should it? Because he said, because he saved Israel. By saying no to everything, he saved Israel. So he should have a big statue in the middle of Jerusalem.
Interesting point of view on that. So this is, so again, I hope to be doing a panel on Wednesday with the editor-in-chief of Jonathan Tobin, or the editor-in-chief of JNS. We'll see. Hopefully that'll come together. And I'm going to make a recommendation. I think the link is in the notes, the description of this show. This on the Through Conversations podcast. The person on the left is Francisco Gil White. He was a tenure-track professor at Penn, got fired because of what he said. I'm telling you, this is one of the best interviews I have ever seen. I hope to interview him soon. His take on the Hajj Aman al-Husseini and why this is a problem. I also recommend also on the open Haviv Redig Gur on the Call Me Back podcast, talking about 100 days in and how this is viewed from the Arab Palestinian side. Fascinating interview and information. And then I do have two things. This is going to be a war in the north, a lot of attacks from the north. I just don't see how it's not going to end up that way. Great article by Jonathan Spire in Friday's Jerusalem Post about Hezbollah's exposed position. Israel's also intensifying raids in the West Bank. And then there was this attack yesterday. Iran sent a long-range missile into Syria to deal with some issues. Part of that was to send a message to Israel. Israel has responded. They took out a senior, I've heard 5 to 10 dead. This attack occurred in a very highly secure elite neighborhood in Damascus. And one of the guys was one of the big architects of the attacks on U.S. bases in Syria. He was like just under Soleimani, who the Trump administration took out 4 years ago. And this was a pretty big, a very precise attack directed at military people, took out a vehicle, and I think it killed about 10 people. And they've come out. Iran has essentially admitted it. This is this morning's Tehran Times. Iran will send the bill to Tel Aviv. They also came out with a newspaper yesterday, Iran's Eyes on Israel, showing a poster in Tehran, and it says, "Prepare your coffins." Then one other thing, this morning, this is hitting the press. I have a couple slides on this one other thing, by the way. So the Syria and Russia have started joint Air Force patrols near the Golan Heights. Russia using some of its most advanced early warning aircraft and advanced fighters. The Syrians are using their good MiGs that they have. The Financial Times, what does Iran want? This is the New Yorker, how 10 Middle East conflicts are converging into one big war, talking about all the different places that these just problems that could all be a flashpoint. And then this is, I'll talk about, China's losing population, and it came out in the press, in the Chinese press this week. But they said, we got it under control. We're going to start getting more people. But this was an interesting article in the American Spectator, Putin's March to the Red Sea, about how Putin's Wagner Group and other things are taking over essentially control of governments all across Africa. And that's opening up, including Libya. And that's kind of a big deal when we talk about Bible prophecy. So you can get that at the American Spectator. Okay, Trump asked, Britain has come out with a laser weapon. They're tested it up off of the coast of Scotland, and it seems to be working. And then here is Trump at a rally in Iowa last week, asked a question, and I'll just end with this because this seems to be where the world is going. So here is former President Trump answering a question.
Clearly, it's no secret that our country is in chaos. The world is in chaos. What happened with Yemen and the missile strikes the last few days, Ukraine, Palestine, we don't even know where the Secretary of Defense is right now. Are we on the brink of World War III?
I think we're the closest that we've ever been. And, Joe, this won't be a regular war. This is not going to be, as I say, army tanks running back and forth, shooting each other. These are weapons of mass destruction, the likes of which nobody's ever seen. I've seen them. And this is obliteration. This is not a world war like we are used to. World War I, World War II were terrible, horrible. This is so much bigger than that. This is, like annihilation. And we have people that can't put two sentences together. Our president can't speak. He can't speak a full sentence. And he's negotiating with Putin, and he's negotiating with President Xi of China, who's very tough and very smart. I say that, and the media says, oh, you called him smart. Yeah, he's smart. He's very smart. He controls 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. I'd say that's smart. And he's a guy who loves China. And these are people that love their country, or certainly whether they love their country or not, they want to make their country great again, right? Like we're doing. We were doing things at this country that nobody's ever seen.
So that's interesting. So listen, sobering times, right? But we know the Lord has us, and we have some work to do. Occupy till he comes, share the gospel. And there's a lot more, but I've used up my time this morning. And so let's pray. I always use up my time. I always use less time than I want. So that's, even when I go long, that's the way it is. But so listen, stay in the Word, stay focused. I did preach first hour. You can find that on our YouTube channel as well. And anyway, let's pray. Lord, we live in troubling times. There's good news and bad news. There are people that don't seem to be working in our best interest. Lord, I pray that you will help us to stand strong, to stand firm in our faith, and to always be committed to the truth of the gospel, the truth of the Word of God, and always act truthfully but in love towards those around us. Just pray that you will bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.